Hello everyone, nice to see you. The final revision session of summer 2023. To all you students taking this live when you've got, I know there's been chemistry today, other A-levels, there's exams all week. If you're taking this live with us, fair play to you. Thank you very much for being here, teachers, for organising that too. With that in mind, I'd like to give the guys at King's College Taunton a little shout out. I don't know who's running the Twitter feed. I think it's Sarah or one of the team. But I just want to say thanks for that. It's so lovely to see those things on Twitter. I genuinely appreciate it. And a little shout out for you guys and just say hello. Now, about today, just remind us first of all, you should have as a minimum for this session, you should obviously have the live feed or the on demand. You should also have the notes pages. They're just down in the YouTube description, which takes you off to the hub page where you can download everything freely. Ideally, you'll have eyes also on the national mock exam. You don't have to sit that as an assessment. Just use it as a sort of an example paper if you want to. Let some sound go through, Marta. Yeah. Also, the mark schemes that go with that and the model answers. Now, I want to talk about this session specifically today, folks, because I almost feel apologetic about what's about to come up, because I've put so much content into this that it's kind of hard to teach it to you. I feel like I'm signposting this afternoon. I feel like I'm saying, here's the key skill, here's the key information, make sure you know it. I think you're going to get a real feel for that. Can I stress, as part of this session, you're probably going to need to recover this maybe 1.5 times, 2 times, just to make sure you get every single bit of detail into it. It's very linguistic. I'll talk about that in a bit more in a second. And therefore, rather than sort of going very few topics, I've tried to condense as much as possible into the session, albeit we're covering in real good detail. So it's very reliable, but there is a lot to go through here. So brace yourselves and be prepared to just tuck back into it, I suppose, if you need to. Finally, before we get started, 2 things actually. Just to introduce or reintroduce my confidant, my professional confidant, Marta, who's on the call. Marta is receiving your chat messages. If on the hub page, you can live chat with us there. We'll also pick up your social media messages if you contact us there. There's no live chat on YouTube. We learned our lesson. And then finally, guys, from our hearts, if you could give us the subscribe and the like, it makes the biggest difference. I actually got an additional service added to our YouTube channel today because of how much viewing and likes we've had in the last month. So we're able to do more and more and provide more and more. So genuinely, if you're able to do that, I'm sorry if it's a bit of a plea, it actually helps us. So if you could find it in your heart to do that, I would really, really appreciate it. Okay, Marta, unless you tell me anything else, we're going to get cracking with some emergence and evolution of sport. This lot probably can't wait. And unless you tell me otherwise, we're going to get cracking.
Yeah.
Let's go. Headphones, by the way, it's really hot here, so I might have to take quite regular stops just to waft my armpits. But I'm going to get the headphones on, digital pens ready. Let's line up the other feed, and hopefully this is going to come through nice and clean. 1 second, please. Okay, let's actually do this. So, folks, well, let's go over it. Let me sort of just take you through it. We're doing paper 3, obviously. Can I remind you what you should have available to you during the session? As an absolute minimum, you should have the notes pages that I've created. They match exactly what I want to cover on the screen. And you should have the exam infographics in front of you as well, which give you effectively the proportion of skills and structures that are part of the paper 3 exam. Ideally as well, folks, you'll have knowledge of or have taken or have used my national mock exam paper, my national mock exam mark scheme, and my national mock exam model answers. Exam twice there. It doesn't matter whether you've sat that paper as an assessment or not. It's the eyes on it that I want. Eyes on, please, folks. Eyes on those 3 things. Should be the arrows either way, but you know what I mean? Eyes on it, because those are going to be excellent guides for you in terms of the potential correct answers you will be given in a few days' time. So that I want you to do. Now, beyond that, folks, I've included again in this session the performance profiles, which we tend to make examples to. Now, I should be clear here, paper 3 is probably the paper of all of the OCR papers where you're least likely to reference Josh or Tom or Kate. We will talk about them at times today, especially when we talk about pathways, but barriers and things like that. But generally, we're going to use these as our 6 performer examples and look at how these theories and how these principles can apply to those. Finally, folks, can I stress the following things? We are covering the following material now. First things first, this material here as its entirety was covered in the national mock exam, the mark schemes and the model answers. Hence me saying to you, go and take a good look at that. But notice I am not covering Global Sporting Events Day. In terms of section 3.1 Sport and Society, I'm covering everything except this today, which is covered in the national mock exam. So therefore, in those combination of resources, you've got what you need. Secondly, folks, notice
that we've got a big section here looking at commercializations, media, the relationship between those things, and then we've got these development pathways. I am missing out today technology. Now, if you're interested in technology, I believe I covered this in 2022. That session is still on YouTube. You can go and have a look at it. It's there for you. We've got obviously for the materials in my main platform, and obviously you see here we're covering drugs as well. Oh, and I should stress, guys, these numbers here, these are the number of marks previously associated with these topic areas in papers between 2018 and 2022. In other words, we're sort of picking content here which has got a heavy representation on the actual exams that have been sent. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to come up. This is not a prediction. Please don't say that word. But what we're saying here is it's a very good investment of your revision time to overlearn this material in association with everything that you're going to learn. I think that's a lovely way to summarize this. Okay, now, without apologizing, I'm going to make an apology here, folks. I almost feel bad about this session. I'll tell you why. I've included so much content that it's actually impossible for me to teach you this, air quotes, teach, in an hour. Okay, so what I'm going to try and do is guide you. Now, can I be clear, folks? You may need to take this session multiple times. You may need to read through your notes, the exam, the model answers multiple times. I'm providing you resources here which equip your revision. I am not necessarily your revision. I am here to be a part of your revision, and the resources I'm providing to you should be the majority part. Why? Because this is a very, very linguistic course. It's a very pastoral kind of, it's a very humanities course. Okay, and because of that, I am including as much as possible. I can't just teach you an equation and then we can apply many different things to it like we can in some of our biomechanics and more biological studies on paper 1. No, what we're doing here is we're looking at a linguistic, humanity-based study of our discipline, and you guys are going to have to learn this material. Okay, so I'm sorry if that comes across as but it's the reality. Now, with that in mind, we're going to go straight into emergence and evolution of sport. I love this topic, by the way. Be warned, I get excited. So, first of all, we want to acknowledge that in pre-industrial times, and of course, it's hard to know exactly when we're talking about here, but let's say we're talking about something pre-1800. I don't like that guide. I would much prefer something pre-1750, but I'm going to use it as our guide for now. Why did we have a separation of sporting identity into upper and lower class sport? Well, it's very simple. We had in this country a feudal system, and that feudal system meant there were two classes, and the middle class was so minor, so few of people, that in essence it didn't exist. So therefore we get this separation, this split, this segregation of experience into upper class sport and lower class sport based on that principle. Furthermore, we can say as well that what we've got here is a different nature of those activities. So I'm going to go to the right first and look at what we might call lower class sport. Okay, lower class sport. What are we talking about? It's occasional. Why? Because people worked upon the agricultural calendar. I'm going to put AC for agricultural calendar, not air conditioning. Agricultural calendar for the lower class people meant it was occasional. It's simple and unwritten rules. Why? Because they were illiterate. It was wagering. Why? Because it's a good laugh in it for the time. By the way, wagering at the time was so popular it's untrue. Okay, so you think people gamble a lot now? Unbelievable back then. Anyway, I could go into that in detail. Anyway, next, it was violent, uncivilized, rowdy. What a good word, rowdy, isn't it? Why? Because it reflected the harsh nature of the life. Okay, living in the natural surroundings, living in the natural world. And same point here: natural resources, limited equipment. It was infrequent. It was rural. Why? Because we had an agrarian society. Okay, it was occupational. This means it went on to be someone's job. Excellent examples of pedestrian and waterman. There's a couple of others as well. The team size in these lower class sports tended to be unlimited. Think about your mob football. Think about Ashbourne. Think about Kirkenwood. Think about Shinty. And it tended to be masculine in nature, okay? So it was very force-based. It was very masculine. You could use the word sort of aggressive and physical and forceful, these sorts of things. But in exactly the same period of time, what we would consider sort of like our early modern history, pre-1800, maybe even pre-1750, the upper classes, the wealthy, the well-to-do were doing different things. They were doing sports that were time-consuming. They were rule-bound with complex written rules associated. They bloody loved to gamble. Don't worry about that. They were distinct. They loved this segregation. That's a great word to put in here. They loved a bit of segregation from the working classes. It was civilized, but it was equipped, and that equipment was technical, high technology equipment. and it was regular. And by the way, when we talk about regular, it was kind of seasonal. And I don't mean necessarily seasonal just in relation to the natural seasons of the earth. I'm talking about seasonal in the sense that there would have been a real tennis a season, for example, a mountaineering season, for example. These were seasons that people passed through, and the hunting season you may have heard of, for example. So we've got this distinction, we've got this difference, and it's really, really important to be able to sort of describe those. Now we're going to take this further, and we're going to start to look at continuity and change. Can I stress to you, folks, that one of the things that we really want you to be able to do is, whether we are talking about the progression of sporting participation in relation to social class, or whether it's in relation, in a few moments, gender, can I stress to you, basically, the premise I want to get across to you is some things didn't change, there was continuity, and some things changed. And I think it's really possible, maybe even probable, that the nature of your questions that you're going to get are not going to be what was social class like in pre-industrial times. No, they're going to get you to compare this to this, or this to this. Was it the same? Did it change? And that's the skill. So even if you don't listen to me for the next couple of minutes while I talk some of the features of this, you can look back at this table and make those comparisons, make those distinctions, write about those things in your exam. That is going to make a difference to your performance. Now, I realise at the same time I've provided to you what here is a bloody boring table. I get it, okay? I understand. But I've also got to present a lot of information to you all in one go. So, my options are limited. So pre-industrial, what was class like? Well, we've just said it was agrarian, it was feudal, it was a two-class system. Almost no middle class. We've covered these points. Lower class took part in mob games, throwing at cocks. That is not a joke. That was actually a game. The forerunner of the coconut shy at the fair. You threw at a cock, meaning a male chicken, and if you killed it, you took it home. This always reminds me of Life of Brian. I'll have 2 round ones, point you one, and a bag of gravel. That sort of thing. If you don't know what I'm talking about, what just happened was nuts. But if you know that film, you're giggling. Anyway, we also had shin kicking, especially at Cotswold Olympics. Smock racing. I don't like this bit of our course, but apparently, air quotes, women used to do races on festival days for a dress. They did way more than that. It's just we tend to teach it that way. Bare knuckle boxing. Okay, so we often call this pugilism. Anyway, upper class took part in real tennis. They also did cricket, and you see here both classes took part in cricket. Upper classes were also doing things like golf as well. You can slip in golf. They're a literal royal sport developed in the UK for Mary, Queen of Scots. Oh, anyway, whole history. Now, what happened post 1850? The Industrial Revolution is kind of taking place, and it's happening. Lower classes lost their rights. I'm going to come back to that. Large-scale migration from the countryside into the city. Middle class emerged from the sort of like the professional industries and the growth of what we would call cottage industries into large-scale production. And the upper classes carried on as before. So the middle class emerged and developed their own customs. So new middle class, new way of doing things, new identity of sport. And now there's 3 groups, largely groups of people. What about in the 20th century? I grew up in the 20th century. You guys didn't. I did. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? So here we go. You get a split between amateur and professional in the late part of the 20th century. Classic example would be rugby league and rugby union. Rugby league, always professional from pretty much its infancy. Rugby union, I think, professionalised in the 90s. I'm going to say 92, but check that date, I can't remember. There you go. Rugby developed in 2 separate sports. Football, now a lower class game, even though it developed in the public schools. Football had a major working class following. Big levels of spectatorship, okay? And by the way, that was continuity from here. The spectatorship really found its footing here. Rugby union, cricket as middle class games. We still see that today, I think, broadly. And Olympics was upper and middle class. Notice what word is not there. The Olympic movement, which of course it started in the 9th century, technically in 1896, more of which in a second. But it was very much a well-to-do sort of movement. And what about sport today? How does class influence? Well, we've got much better equality today. Fantastic. We've got relatively few high-level amateurs. So amateurs have kind of been driven out of high-level sport because of commercialisation, more of which later, towards professionalism at the top end. But some sports are still exclusive. Can we consider obvious examples like golf, tennis? I mean, I won't even get started on polo. But we've got these sports which are still exclusive today, and some of them structurally so, in terms of the cost, in terms of the access, in terms of the facilities, the equipment, but we've still got this kind of, I like to call it the lag of history making these sorts of activities still in the modern era now not deliberately exclusive, but they tend to be exclusive. I'm not judging, by the way, and there's no point in my judging anyone here. Now then, let's move things on. We don't want to talk about social class anymore. We want to talk about gender. And again, notice this word could be the specific term in your exam question, whether it's class, gender, literacy and education, working time, etc., etc. So pre-industrial, remember we're talking about pre-1800. Okay, we're saying sport is masculine. Lower class activities, strength and force. Women did take part in smock. I've read an amazing book called Sport in the British, and that statement there is ludicrous. Women did a lot of sport in pre-industrial times, or a lot of activity. Sorry, that was me sipping my tea. But we should acknowledge here that your mark is going to come from they took part in smock racing to win a dress. Anyway, women did take part in cricket. Women did take part in upper class pursuits like real tennis. I'll also throw in golf in there as another good example. You had to be well-to-do, very well-to-do do it, but women also played that sport in pre-industrial times. Now, getting into the sort of Victorian, let's talk about, Dickens stories. What are we finding? The Victorian view of women was very fragile, so women were seen as delicate. Okay, by the way, this is not my opinion. Okay, sport was not suitable for women at that period. That was the societal view. Women needed to wear modest dresses. They needed to be non-competitive. Women needed to do non-strenuous, vigorous activity. Women needed to be, air quotes, ladylike. But it began to change. Charlotte Dodd, look her up, absolute hero, literally. She was a phenom. She smashed everyone at Wimbledon, and she was an absolute animal, athlete, brilliant tennis player. Who knows how she'd get on in the modern era, but Lottie Dodd, she really started to change that view through her kind of athleticism and vigour. And then we kind of get the acceptance and growth of girls' schools and athleticism for girls, but it was athleticism, but it was different somehow. You know, it was more, it still had those notions of ladylike, and I'm not knocking any sport, by the way. My kids play these sports. I love these sports, but games like netball, for example, seem to fit that model more closely and therefore became more acceptable than, let's say, rugby. So those things, thankfully, are changing, but this is where that heritage and that lag comes from. Sport in the 20th century, predominantly male still during, like, my childhood even. Gradually increased participation for women over the course of the century. Many sports, such as golf, resistant to women. I remember in my adulthood, golf clubs still refusing to let women into their clubs. Anyway, that's that. And a model of sport and women's sport. Now, I just want to represent this, but I've actually seen this change today. But what we tend to say is the World Cup, the Women's World Cup, the 100-metre final, the women's... No. Sorry, I feel quite strongly about this. We are doing, so for example, we are talking about the FIFA Women's, let's say WC, and the FIFA Men's World Cup. That's what we should be saying. Nothing wrong with saying Women's World Cup, as long as we do the same here. Or it's contextual, okay? What we can't say is the real one, the World Cup, and then the women's one, that's that secondary. No, we have to challenge that. Sport in the 21st century. Better equality, good. Introduction of additional Olympic events. If you're not sure about this, things like marathon, things like 10,000 meter running, pole vault. These were not permitted for women until I want to say 80s and 90s. I remember them not being there. Still got it with decathlon, right? Still a residue of Victorian tradition. Women are often doing the double shift. This means that they're the domestic lead at home, doing most of the home stuff, and they're also providing a professional role as well, working, doing the double shift. High female dropout rate, increasing participation for women overall. Okay, so we've got a large dropout rate for women in teenage years, but the participation level for women overall is increasing. So that's our gender. Now, I know you're bored of me already, but I'm going to keep going. Law and order. What have we got here? In pre-industrial times, we have got next to no... You guys who did GCSE history and you did crime and punishment, you know way more about this than me. You know the whole history of all that stuff. But, generally speaking, little law and order. Law of nature prevailed on the countryside. Authorities tried to ban violent sports, but it didn't work. They allowed mob games to be violent, okay? These were the reasons upper class played separately. So the upper class, we're staying out of that because, it's for the rowdy ones. Anyway, I don't know where these impressions are coming from. Once we get past the Industrial Revolution, or sort of towards the back end of it, We've got the development of the police force. Again, you history students can tell us all about the Bobbies, Robert Peel, and did a middle class banned violent sports. So there's like a real civilizing movement here. They banned mob games. These rights were lost. We get violence not tolerated, civilizing process, bringing things into this kind of middle class sort of view of the world. The working class still ignored them, but that was the intent. 20th century, my childhood, issues of hooliganism at sports events. Large-scale policing at major events, terrorism even. So, folks, we get a different nature of violence in this way, right? So here we've got violence, a bit less, but here's like a redefinition of violence at sport. And let me tell you, the 80s for football hooliganism was ridiculous, okay? And I personally got exposed to violence at numerous football matches as a child. You think that through. It's not a nice thing to experience. Anyway, today, sport as social control. This means that sport is a vehicle for kind of releasing emotion and aggression and excitement. It appeases people. There's the word there, appeasement. We get decreased hooliganism, although I've seen some recently. I don't want to call anyone out. Congratulations to West Ham the other day, but I saw some poor behaviour from the fans there. Threat of terrorism. Banning orders, there's people not allowed to go to games, alcohol bans, drug laws, legal action taken against those breaking the law. So let's not think that sport and the law has been decoupled. It absolutely hasn't. Okay, but we've got a sort of a different spectacle, a different nature of that law and order and its involvement. Now we're nearly there, folks. I know you're bored with me. Education and literacy. So pre-industrial times, basically, lower classes were illiterate and uneducated. Our upper classes were literate. Why? The men, that is. Why? Because they went to those Clarendon elite schools. Think your Rugby, think your Eton, think your Harrow, your Winchester, St Paul's. That's what happened. Now, there was no national education system. That wasn't until 1870. There was a lack of rules based on low literacy rates. Now, if you've got if people can't read or write, you're not going to have written rules. It doesn't make sense. Games passed on by word of mouth. The oral tradition should not be underestimated as an important factor in the development of sport in our society. The oral tradition, that's what we're talking about. Only upper classes played codified games like real tennis. That segregation point. Now, this started to change. Why? Literacy improved. Why? Because the Forced Act in 1870 made education compulsory. Now, let's not kid ourselves that the government in 1870 was like, we've got to get these poor working class kids educated, bless them. No, they wanted service people for the military, and they wanted them disciplined and fit and tolerant and, conformist. I wonder if you recognise any of those still in schools. Anyway, let's not go down that road. Middle classes were educated, of course, these what we call Philistine schools, these copies of the elite schools middle class families could pay to go to there. We also got sports became codified due to the skills of the middle class. Codified means formation of national governing bodies and the rules being established and accepted. There's our NGB's point. Now, it says the skills. The middle classes were effectively learning business skills to run and own banks and factories and commerce and So, of course, they used those to codify the sport as well. In the 20th century, we've got education for all people, compulsory PE for all, drill, physical drill, military drill, changed to physical training, and eventually in the 50s, through something called moving and growing and planning the program, changed into what we call physical education, the experience you've hopefully had really positively in your school. Movement, which informs learning through movement, physical literacy, developing still. Sport in the 21st century. Again, compulsory PE. Hey, guess what? We've got this A-level thing and this GCSE thing, this BTEC thing, brilliant. Sports science of movement, and we've got still a teenage dropout rate. So the negative here is we're still getting young people falling out of love with movement during their secondary school years, if not before. Okay, let's finish off strong. Post-1850, can we notice here, folks, this is one time period. We've got the influence of the public schools here. What were these public schools? Remember, when we say public, we're talking about fee-paying, trustee-based, boarding, Spartan schools. Okay, these are schools for the wealthy, the well-to-do. What were they about? They were about promoting and organising. They helped the formation of national governing bodies. Football Association in Cambridge in 1863, for example. They developed competitions such as, let's say, the FA Cup, won, 10 days ago by Manchester City against Man United, 2-1, what a game. Anyway, who won it? Women was Arsenal. Arsenal? No, Man United. Oh my God, so embarrassing. I've done the same thing. I remember the men's one and the women's. Geez. Anyway, spread sports to other areas and countries. Okay, so we had this notion of sports spreading out from here, and they codified the rules. Now, They also promoted ethics from these schools. Why? Because sport was seen in hand with godliness, an expression of God, an expression of creation. Therefore, we get the development of an idea called muscular Christianity. This is godliness of the mind, physicality, and health of the body. Healthy body, pious, if you're not sure what this word is, it means very religious, mind. Sport should be respectable, no gambling, non-violent, and based on skill to express this creative, godly influence. By the way, at no point am I expressing personal opinions, just so you know here. If anyone wants to ask my opinion, feel free. Now then, cult of athleticism. We get now the development of, I've got one of those electronic tables that moves up and down and just beeped it because it's locked. Athleticism is the combination of, its character development is the combination of what we call physical endeavour and moral integrity together through movement. Now, physical endeavour, what is this? It was fitness, health, competitive. The schools wanted to develop this in the boys, girls later. But they also wanted them to be brave, leaders, honourable and loyal, often to their house, to their school, to their teammate, etc. And then these boys, later girls, went on to spread the games to the rest of the side. So the games were developing in these spaces, and then they spread them. How did they spread them? They went as army officers and spread the games through the empire. They went into the clergy, into religious order, and spread the games through their parishes and church teams. They became industrialists, think factory owners, and they spread the games through their factories and also through the empire. They became politicians who made policy and were posted overseas. And they became teachers and masters, returning to their own schools to coach the next generation. Can you see how the growth of athleticism, sport, codification, it occurred in those public schools, but it spread for those reasons because those boys were there temporarily and went on to be other influential roles in society. Now, guys, we are very nearly there, I promise, but availability of time, I know this is a big stint, and well done for sticking with me. Sip my tea. Availability of time and work condition, of course, some things continue, some things changed. In our pre-industrial revolution society, we've got a countryside-based lifestyle. We've got the lower class following the agricultural calendar. I mentioned this before. We've got few hours. We've got sport taking place on what we call holy days, literally the origin of the word holiday. Wakes were parish church saint days, something that's still very common in other parts of Europe, especially Catholic parts of Europe like Spain, where what you would call a wake in English, but a saint day is absolutely typical. Upper classes had extensive free time, and the upper classes engaged in activities like fox hunting throughout a season, a point we've made. But by the Industrial Revolution, what do we get? People moving from here to the city. Okay, migration, urbanisation. From the field to the factory. Very long hours, very poor pay, very unhealthy conditions. I won't go into details, but it was grim as anything. Holy days no longer given off. They went down to 4 bank holidays. Conditions improved by the end of the century. Saturday half day were introduced through a series of factory acts, and that limited the amount of work that people could do. So by the end of this period, they were able to actually have some spare time, these working class people. But in the 20th century, when I was a kid, increased time available for most people, structured sport in all activities, and weekends dedicated sport. That's what the 20th century was like. And as we get to today, theoretically more time available for people to participate. I think people would question that. People have more options compete with their time. So think about, when we talk about more options, you could go out and have a game of back garden cricket, but presumably you could also got a choice of playing cricket on Xbox. I don't know if there is a game for that. I'm sure there is. But that's a conflict, right? That's a choice. The weather might dictate that one. Introduction of streaming services and gaming, which I've mentioned. Spare time might not be spent on movement. I think that's a real fact going on in our society. Now, guys, I've slogged you there going through some real information. Can I just stress again what I said before we take a quick break? There's no way I can teach you all of that in whatever that was, 15, 20 minutes. That is a vast amount of information. That'll probably take something like 3-4 weeks for me to teach in the classroom. But I'm trying to provide it to you in a nutshell. It's your job to learn it, to represent it in your writing, to perform different skills on it, and obviously read the model answers that I provide, because that's exactly what those things are. Okay, quick break. Let's keep pushing, shall we? We're now talking about the variable of cash, of money, of disposable income. What do we find? Well, we found in pre-industrial times, lower class had very little money, so they had a subsistence lifestyle, effectively hand to mouth. Sports were basic and simple. Why? No investment, no equipment. obvious. Natural resources, freely available spaces. Lower class had no dress code, okay? You just obviously wear what you want. Upper class had disposable income. Sports such as real tennis had specialist facilities and equipment and even a dress code. Upper class had it, there you go. Now, once the Industrial Revolution takes place, we get working class had very little money in 1850. Why? Because wages were horrific. That's the next point. Horrific. They've migrated by this point, right? Or large numbers have. Wages often substituted for housing or keep. So you went to work and you were given grim old housing. And some of the stats on this are ridiculous. Sometimes you have 20 families in one basement room with an open hearth fire with no windows. Just picture it. Anyway. We've also got wages improved later to the Factory Acts there, and therefore we had spare money to spectate by that latter point. 20th century, my childhood, increase in disposable income, sport was a fashionable lifestyle, most can afford to participate, most is not all of course, and we've still got exclusivity in tennis, in golf, and we could go further. 21st century today, what are we seeing? We've got increased disposable income in the Western world. Now this is the thing in a moment that's led to commercialization. Because people do have that disposable income, so let's get them spending it on sport and make some profit out of it, right? And disposable income can be spent on gyms, health clubs, sports clubs, etc., etc. Good. Okay, last one, I promise, I think. Yeah. Okay, type and availability of transport. What was this like? Well, pre-industrial, there weren't any for the lower classes, okay? So games were localised and localised versions. Many games were isolated and unique. Don't get me started on cheese rolling on Cooper Hill in Gloucester. Go past that hill all the time. But you've also, even if you look at things like mob games, mob football, there were different versions in many, many different locations. No rail network yet. Upper class could travel by carriage or horse. That would have been expensive, of course. And games spread and became national, international, such as real tennis for those upper class people. But by the 1850s, we've got a railway network. We've got national fixtures enabled, FA Cup football league, I think it was 1872, check that. National leagues and cups from spectators travel to away games, often on the train, of course. Day trips to the seaside resorts in Britain, some of my favourite places on earth. If you'd never been to Silloth in Cumbria, you never lived. Anyway, sport in the 20th century, increased availability for all. Air travel, making international fixtures and spectating possible. We've seen that in the last few. I was literally watching matches, Manchester people in Istanbul in the last 48 hours. Anyway, army is a concept. Travelling and following the England cricket team. Euro competitions in many sports, cars become easy and cheap travel, and of course now today we've got low cost flying, which depending, you've got to follow the rules, haven't you? Try getting on Ryanair with a bag that's slightly too big. Anyway, that's our other conversation. Now, this is where I want to finish off with our emergence and evolution, guys. I think it's really important that we kind of dwell here just for a few moments, okay? Because we want to be understanding three things about the period of time that we have talked about, okay? So I want to show you sort of three features of this graph. Between 1800 and 1900, public school athleticism continued. Yes, it changed and it varied, but the participation was continuous. So you've got this kind of enclave sort of idea in public schools that they kept doing stuff regardless. But what we find with what we would call lower class people, so the rest of the graph is about the lower classes, what we find here is that their participation declined between 1800 and 1850. Why? Well, it declined because of migration and urbanisation. It declined because of a lack of space in cities and towns. It declined because of down arrow, poor health. It declined because of up arrow, lots of work time. Therefore, no time to play. It declined because of down arrow, poor wages. You see all these reasons that the working classes, their participation declined, because they moved to the city away from the agricultural experience that they had before. This is over generations, of course, and these experiences meant that they couldn't do what they did before. We saw the death of tradition, so we had the loss of rights. Literally, your game's being banned. We get the loss of tradition. Okay. Now, from 1850 to 1900, something called involvement, not participation, increased. Why did it? Well, first of all, We get the development of things like factory acts. We get the Saturday half day. Let's call it half day. We get up arrow gradually improving health. We get the building of city-based parks and baths, and by baths I mean swimming pools. We also get an increase in things like wages. We get an increase in things like transport. We therefore get an increase in spectatorship. So this is what's happening over this time period. Therefore, can you see why we've said involvement rather than participation? Because involvement increased, but quite a lot of it was not participating, but watching and spectating and supporting. Now, I could go further with that, but I want to get that principle in your mind, because I think if you can see it that way, you can start to understand everything that's come before. Now, I'm really aware of time here, so let's move on to the Olympics. I'm going to go pretty quick here. We're looking first of all at the background to the modern Olympics. Let's just tell you a story. This geezer, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, I don't speak French, it's probably not said like that. If you are French or if you speak French, I am sorry. So this fella, he was an aristocrat in France, mid to late 19th century, and he was very interested in the influence of movement, very interested in the influence of modern sport that was developing, particularly in Britain, particularly in the public schools, of course. So what did he do? He visited the UK. He looked around public schools like Eton and Rugby and Charterhouse. He then went and had a look at sort of what you call multi-event spectacles, such as the Dover Games and the Much Wenlock Games you see down here. And he looked at these things, and he looked at these things. He was also influenced by the ancient Olympic Games, which had happened in ancient Greece thousands of years earlier. Therefore, he took those ideas and he decided that the games that he wanted to produce will be influenced by the desire to bring peace and unite people. Remember, this is a fairly warring time. This part of, Europe's been in revolution many times in the 19th century. 1848 revolutions, the unification of Germany, the unification of Italy in 1860. There's a lot of separation of Austro-Hungary. Anyway, we don't need to go into it, but it was a very warring time, right? So he wanted to bring this about. It seems like a good idea. Modern games based on athleticism, physical endeavour, moral integrity. So what did he do? He produced the 1896 games. Now, excuse me for that dingle. We can go back and say, right, it was for peace and unity. Just so you know, they didn't let women in the stadium. Just so you know, there was probably only 7 countries represented, and you can probably guess the skin texture of the majority of the people who were there. This is a definition of desire and unity. I mean, I don't think we can necessarily call it what we would call it today. Nevertheless, that's what we're talking about. So that's what happened. And then we start to look at sort of the exploitation of these games. When did these games really sort of become significant as kind of political expressions? Well, nothing more so than in 1936, post First World War, pre-Second World War, 3 years before international conflict, and so on. So what do we get here? In 1936, we've got Hitler at the centre of the Olympic movement. He was 3 years into his chancellorship. They built 100,000 seat stadium. Stadium is still there, by the way. It was used in numerous tournaments recently, developed obviously. It was the first games to be televised, and radio went to 41 countries. I mean, you might be interested in Goebbels and his association with radio. You've probably read it. You've probably done that in your history courses. The first to be televised. Beautiful, magnificent films such as Olympia were made by this, despite one's politics, by this amazing filmmaker, Leni Riefenstahl. If you think I'm blowing smoke, this woman was a genius, okay? She happened to be a Nazi as well, but, she made these incredible films. And Goebbels, by the way, was absolutely obsessed with film and obsessed with the expression of film, and they produced these amazing things. And if you ever get a chance to watch Olympia, despite its sort of context, it's an amazing piece of work. Now, anyway, what have we got? Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda, they promoted racial supremacy from the games, but they had a bit of a thorn in the side. The fella Jesse Owens only gone and won 4 medals, and of course his skin texture happens to be dark, right? So what happens here is that there's a story that this incredible athlete Owens was refused his hand from Hitler, who wouldn't shake his hand and present to him. What the Germans said was that Hitler wasn't in the stadium at the time, but of course you can read between the lines, right? He didn't want to be seen. It's not funny, but he didn't want to be seen. So anyway, you see that political exploitation. What about in Mexico? What do we get here? Well, we get the first game in Latin America. Brilliant. Tommy Smith. By the way, some of my absolute world heroes are in this particular story. Tommy Smith and John Carlos. Here's Smith. Here's Carlos. suspended after they made a black power salute. There's the salute. There's the salute. What did they do? They wore black gloves, by the way, which were borrowed from this fella, Peter Norman, and they wore black socks and no shoes. They made a black glove fist. And Peter Norman here, he lent the gloves and wore a badge in support. So these three were in it together, right? Although obviously, I guess Peter Norman was slightly more passive to some degree. The athletes brought shame to the US. Now again, this is not my opinion. They were all banned. Just so you realise this guy, Peter Norman, a literal hero of mine. I'm not exaggerating. I've done whole publications on him. He not only did Australia ban him, but they banned every other sprinter, male and female, in the next series of games and Olympics they had. They just banned them all because of the possible threat of this message. Think about that. Unbelievable. Anyway, there were major protests in games because of a lack of freedom of expression. So also Mexico at the time was either in, I think, or coming out of dictatorship at that time. And so of course this sort of games being held there was not seen as a very positive. Now let's move forward to 1972. By the way, it was 1968 we just did. Let's move forward to 1972. What do we get here? We get the raiding of the Olympic Village by something called the Black September Organization. They kidnapped and murdered 11 Israeli athletes and officials, my God. And this led to the development in the modern word of anti-terrorism. So a lot of what we sort of hear through our news outlets, things like that today, it stems from here. So how do they do this? They basically seized these people, killing some in the process. They got a helicopter to the airport. Then there was a botched attempt to rescue them, and 11 died from machine gun fire grenades. It's awful. And 3 terrorists survived. 1 is still alive and in freedom today. Just think this one through. Games stopped for a day. How do you view that? And you've got this sort of notion here of Die Weiter and Spiele. The games were dubbed the cheerful games. Didn't feel that way, does it really? So again, can we just use that word exploitation? These games being used. I'm not going to... It's awful. Now then, when we get into the 80s, what do we get here? Well, we get the games in Moscow in 1980, the first in Europe. This is a socialist, it's a communistical state, okay? 65 countries boycotted it. Jimmy Carter, then president, first one I remember, boycotted and others led. And why? They claimed it was because Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979 under dodgy pretenses. No comment. Sip my tea just to pause that reflection. Some athletes still competed under the Olympic flag, so some still went. And it led to the boycott of the US in 1984, more of which a second. GB won. We did great. GB went to Moscow, by the way. They're bloody brilliant. Why? Because loads of people who were good weren't there. This is positive, though. 1 in 5 athletes were women, which was not traditionally the case. And the Americans produced something called the Liberty Bell Classic, which was an alternative games to be held simultaneously. Oh, it was just after, I think, from memory. I think it was a year after. Now then, we also now get into 1984. The first games I remember really, really well. Okay, so I remember this. Remember the opening ceremony. I was a kid at the time. 8 years old I was at the time. There you go. 76 I was born. Anyway, so here we go. We've got the games in LA. 14 Eastern Bloc countries boycotted. So you get a sort of a tit for tat here. Therefore, they organised the Friendship Games instead. By 1986, 2 years after, there was a Goodwill Games allowed, so the Soviets and US competed. I remember that as well. The 84 Olympics were first privately funded games. They made $250 million surplus, and I don't know what that would be in modern money. What are we now? We're 30 years later. I'm going to say that, well, that's numerous billions anyway. I don't know how many. Organising committee of 150 representatives. Notice the word, not organisers, business people. It was really about money, sponsorship, commercialisation. But also, only one other bid for the games themselves, and that was from Tehran. So the Olympic Committee, IOC, had very little choice but to go with LA, even though it was this profit-driven model. They had to do that because they had no other real choices. They had Tehran and Iran, which of course would have been challenging for numerous reasons. So folks, can I just stress there, with the exception of global events, we've just done the entirety of 3.1 section 1. Okay, now I've got to change my canvas. I know this is heavy, but it's going to serve you well. Cheers. So let's do the topic of drugs, okay? And first of all, we're going to look at legal and illegal supplements and the differences between. Can I just give you some examples of legal supplements? Sometimes people struggle with this. You've got creatine, specifically creatine monohydrate, really good for explosion with colostrum. This is the early, very thick milk that comes from the breast when mammals first birth. We've got vitamin supplements. We've got protein supplements, which I'm sure many of you use. These are regulated, and therefore they tend to be pure and high quality. Obviously, the more you spend, the better you get, presumably. And it's not involving breaking the law, nor is it involved breaking the rules of sport. So these things are all considered to be fine. They are not banned, therefore there's no punishment. And that's, of course, very different to illegal drugs. We're talking about steroids, this sort of testosterone-based anabolic agent. We're talking about analgesics, which are for pain relief. We're talking about peptide hormones like human growth hormone and erythropoietin, EPO. These are unregulated, may cause health issues. Now, this could be because they're unregulated. But the other thing you want to say here is that these are taken in I was going to say I put major. I wanted to actually say massive doses. Okay, so athletes tend to take huge quantities of this, and it can lead to bans and punishments because of that illegal nature. Look out for that question in your exam, okay? Now, why would someone do it? Okay, why? And I'm going to come to a bit of a conclusion about this particular area. Why do they do it? Well, first of all, they might have a win at all costs attitude. Can I just stress, this is not a win ethic. This is not a determination to win. This is willingness to do anything to cause you to be more likely to win, including unethical, deviant-based rule breaking. The other thing is we get fame, fortune, rewards. Therefore, we get things like pressure. We get stuff like leveling the playing field in a culture. I don't want to forgive any kind of cheat, but I sometimes do think about your cases like Lance Armstrong going in the playing field. You know, this is why I'm I'm not going to go into it, but I'm a big respecter of people like Frankie Andreu, for example. I'm not going to go into that, but people who actually said, no, I'm not going to do this, and if I lose my career, I lose my career. And we think we should sort of stop and reflect on that a second. And obviously people do it for positive psychological effects. Training harder, for example, it's like it gives you that kind of not just physical boost, but you're completely committed, right? And why do they do it? Increased chance of winning. Now, my view of this is wherever you get the following things, you will get drug taking. Wherever you get hyper competitiveness, and you add to that massive rewards. Now, not for everyone, I'm not saying everyone here, but I guarantee you this will lead to PEDs. Performance enhancing drugs. That is going to be the case. Now, there's other factors that are other variables here. The nature of the activity, is it force-based or skill-based? Which drug, depending on the activity. But if you get that equation, you are going to get drug taking. Okay, it should not be underestimated what this means and what this means. People in that situation will do anything to win. Okay, anything, and will cheat if necessary. Let's take it further. Commercialization sport. Well, first of all, we'll look at this more in a second. What is it? Well, it's the use of sport as a vehicle or as a commodity to form profit. So, of course, this is about a profit motive. Okay, that's what we're talking about. So, what led to sport being more commercial? Well, people were watching it. Brilliant. The media wanted to show it. Brilliant. We've got higher standards through professionalism. Brilliant. That, of course, means it's more likely the media will want to show it. Advertisers want to be linked to it. Sponsors want their products out there. And the public wants to see the activity. That's what leads to commercialization. But what is the impact of that commercialization? Now, folks, can I stress to you, look, you don't need me for this bit, bluntly, but can we just recognize that what we are doing here is we are evaluating. We are taking the positive impact of commercialization, the negative impact of commercialization, and we're saying, right, what's this like for individual sports? So in essence, folks, I'm going to read this out to you, but I mean, you know, you guys can crack this really by yourselves. Can I just say, when we evaluate things, we give the pro, the con, the for, the against, the strength, the weakness, right? But we also conclude. Now, if you're not sure how to do that, I've got my 10-mark writing frames out there. They're completely free. Ask your teacher to give it to you. I cannot stress enough that should be what you're using, okay? But we should be forming our evaluation and then reaching a conclusion. I've got numerous models of conclusions that you can use as well. So what's the impact of commercialization on the sport? Positives. More media companies, more investment, selling sponsorship, bigger audience, international markets, figures go up who's watching your sport, more international interest, grassroots participation, and sport modernizes. What's not to love, right? Well, let me tell you. The negatives of this for the sport are the sport itself becomes secondary to profit. Secondly, changing things like kickoff times, losing traditions such as rule changes, pressure from sponsors who want their stuff out there. Rules might need to change. Funding only for some Lack of interest in minority sports. Scandals are public. Men's sport is backed more than women's. This is not good. And commercialization can reinforce stereotypes around a sport, such as, like the gender thing, for example. So we're able to evaluate at this point. We're able to say, okay, this is positive, this is negative, this is positive. Now I'm going to reach my judgment, my conclusion. What about on performers? Lots of similarities here. Why would commercialization be good for like a good quality athlete? More income, career, be full-time, prize money, people know you, people follow you, commercial opportunities from people following you, sponsorship, and you can even become a celebrity, bless them. Now, there's negatives here, folks. What are they? Only some people get this opportunity, okay? Pressure, sponsors and media, behaviour is highlighted and broadcast. If you do something wrong, everyone's seen it. Media intrusion, you don't get any privacy. Not able to do normal things such as shopping. God, it sounds brilliant. Performances are analysed in fine detail. I hate shopping. I don't mind supermarket shopping, but don't. I've got teenage kids. Don't ask me to go in Urban Outfitters. Jesus. Performances are analysed in fine detail. Okay, so that can be negative. May receive insults and aggression. I mean, there's been so many examples. I go back to the men's Euros in, was it 2021 with Sancho and who was it? Sancho and Rashford, and there was someone else, Osaka, and so on. Demand to compete relentlessly, non-stop. Demand to put the sport above one's health. Sponsorship can be lost. So it's not always good for the performer, is it? There are issues. Guys, can I just stress, you just need to get these into your evaluative answer. Like, you can almost skip me here if you're not live. Like, read the bloody stuff, right? And get it in your answer. So what have we got about spectators? Specifically for these guys. More availability, brilliant. Every day, I'm lost at the moment because the football season's over. I don't know what to do with myself. More choice. Access to international versions, fantastic. Increased revenue. Better stadia, full-time athletes at a better standard, more exciting versions of the sport emerge. Wow, it's so good to watch, but there's negatives. We lose traditional values, okay? Change in format can disrupt spectators' experience. I don't necessarily want to watch something at the same time that it's been made available in Asia because that's, it's been changed from 3 o'clock kickoff when I want to watch it. Increase in demand can raise ticket prices. Sports lose their local identity, become global and corporate. Classic examples are having few homegrown players or athletes in a team, say. Fan becomes a consumer, not a spectator. Connection between fans and athletes can be lost, and negative behaviour is very public and have a negative impact. I mentioned West Ham recently. What about the impact of commercialisation on the society itself? More money from media sponsors. Grassroots is invested. NGBs can support children. Popular sports now have the money to nurture athletes from all classes. Okay, so we can actually help leg up people. Talented athletes from low classes might receive sponsorship. Increased media coverage has exposed people for all classes of sport. It's aspirational. So this is great for society, right? Lower class young people have role models and inspire young people to participate. What a wonderful set of characteristics. However, it's not all good. Sports still presented with stereotypes. Think gender, think ethnicity, think age. Exactly this. Media coverage is not fair. It's mostly men. It's mostly a handful of sports. The richest sports get all the opportunity to get richer, whilst the minor sports don't. Sponsors are only interested in highest levels of exposure. Sponsors have little commercial interest in minorities, especially there should be accountable Paralympic sport. And a high proportion of Olympic medalists come from higher socioeconomic groups. There's some really interesting stats on this. Basically, our Olympic team is overrepresented by well-to-do, wealthy, disposable income families. Okay, how has media coverage changed since 1990? This is absolutely my hitting zone. I grew up in this, so I remember all this stuff. So basically, how has TV changed? More coverage, great use of technology, less elite sport on free-to-air TV, so you've got to get subscriptions. Options go up. Some sports protected and only available on free-to-air, such as the World Cup Olympics has to be on BBC, ITV, or if it's, I don't know, if it's BT or whatever it's called, TNT Sport, or if it's Sky, they have to open it up. Introduction of satellite and digital, massive growth of viewing options, subscriptions mentioned, pay-per-view, especially for boxing, MMA, these sorts of things, integration of social media, and a massive increase in sponsorship, especially gambling and alcohol. There's questions to raise over that. What about radio? Well, radio is a very popular format these days. Why? DAB is very good quality. Often when it's you may well be like traveling when you're doing this. It's dedicated sport stations like Talk Sport or Radio 5 Live. and local radio providing coverage of local sports. Now, written press, this is interesting. So we get a real decrease in physical newspaper value. There's a lot of click and clickbait and advertising online, of course. Online offers are extremely popular. BBC Sports page, Sky Sports page, choose your own, Daily Mirror, Sports, The Sun, Sport, whatever. Magazine subscriptions remain popular. People love a magazine subscription. It's probably the remaining popular physical version of this. Now, guys, I've got to change canvas, and I'm going to be straight back to you looking specifically at the influence of the media. One moment, please. You guys probably think we're nearly finished, right? That's just quite a bit to do. Can I just stress now, we're looking at the effect of something on individual sports, again, and obviously those other categories, but notice now it's specifically the media. One of the things, rightly or wrongly, you have to do is be able to differentiate between a question on the media and a question on commercialization. Technology is actually another one. We're not covering that today. So what are the positive effects of the media specifically on individual sports? Well, you'll see a lot of overlap, by the way. New formats, rules updated, scheduled more frequently, increased access to international sport, wealthier players become household names, better audience, better technology for officiating, increased TV. By the way, this one's an interesting one. Most refereeing technology actually comes out of media coverage. Increased TV revenue, better player wages, fantastic, good for them. Better development of players, better facilities, increase. What's not to love? What an amazing impact the media has had, right? Well, there's another side, and we'll conclude because we're evaluating. There's a loss of tradition. We get original versions are less valued. Let's talk Test match cricket to 2020, very good example. Little media interest in minority. I'm not happy with this small p, Paralympics should be large p. Sensationalising sport for clicks. Clickbait, folks, great answer. Hyping up rivalries because it sells. People watch on TV rather than the stadium. People don't go. Turns fans into consumers. I hate that. You think about all this money in sport. Think men's football. Think about all that money. What's the source of that money, folks? It's fans, isn't it? Everything from the media, the sponsors. Why are they all investing? Where's the high wages go? We're paying for that. It's something we should reflect on. I'm not saying it's wrong, but we just need to see the circuit, the cycle of what's going on. Over-reliance on the media. Inequality of sports and clubs and media control. These are some potential negatives. Try and give, obviously, examples as you go. What about the effect of the media on the performers? Well, we see some of the same points. Higher income, can be full-time, earning potential, fame, role modelling. We've got a lot of overlap here. Sponsorship opportunities, training facilities better, work with the world's best coaches. Fantastic. What about the negative effects? Well, on the performer, they lose their privacy. They're accountable to every member of the public. They get abuse. Again, Saka, Rashford, and who did I say? Sancho. They increase pressure on performance. Every error is highlighted and sort of consumed. Reduced rest time in the off-season, pressure to play when injured, leading to issues of health. And then on spectators, folks, we're almost there. New formats, brilliant, we love that. Rules updated, scheduled more frequently, increased access, increased standard of play, better stadium. What's not to like? I was at Wembley recently watching my home team, Carlisle United, beat Stockport fans on penalties. And the stadium was ridiculous, unbelievable. Anyway, negative effects on the spectator. You got to pay this stuff. Can't afford it. Coverage disrupted with non-stop adverts, my goodness. Become a consumer. Imagine this. You're sitting in your armchair at home and you're literally being sold to. You're in your house and someone's saying, buy my shit. Sorry, I don't want to swear. Buy my stuff. That's basically what's happening, right? That's weird, isn't it? Anyway, that's what's happening. Quantity of sport can disrupt life. I don't watch adverts anymore. Anyway, there we go. Section 6. We're nearly there, folks. Hang in there. I promise you it's worth it. What is the relationship between sport and the media? Well, it's based on the Golden Triangle. We know this. The Golden Triangle is the commercial relationship between elite level sport, sponsors, and media companies. Can I stress the following points, folks? This model only works when it's cyclical. There's one exception to this. But we must have elite sport. Let's talk about WS, Women's Super League football. Let's talk about Heineken Cup rugby. Let's talk about Ashes cricket. We must have elite sport because it's popular, viewable, exciting, a spectacle. Media companies will invest, will show, will buy the rights. Now, in order to pay for that, the media companies will sell sponsorship to the sponsors, who will also sell sponsorship to the elite sport themselves as well, providing this cycle. But can I stress there is one exception to this? One exception, and it's not only anymore elite sport, it's sometimes now celebrity sport. Now, traditionally, celebrity sport has been done for charity, you know. But if you look at examples like Jake Paul, to an extent, what's his name, Tommy Fury, you've not got elite sport here selling at massive quantities. What have you got here? You've got celebrities jumping the need to do all of this. And I'm not saying Jake Paul's not a good boxer, I'm sure he is, but he is not Canelo. So there is a new way to do it, and you do it in the modern era. You can create this relationship. How? With a massive following, through providing your own content. And some people, like Ryan Garcia in boxing, who recently lost to Gervonta Davis, some people try and do both. They try and be a top-level athlete and a celebrity, and that might be a way he lost, unfortunately, for him. Okay, development pathways in the UK. We are looking at a 4-phase program. What is it? Phase 1 is the assessment of skill-based physical attributes, okay, or skill-based attributes and physical attributes. And we get an in-depth analysis of competition and training history. So what the first way of effectively developing someone is looking at what they're doing as a child, and is that going to provide them the context to move forward? If the answer is yes, we go into phase 2 and phase 3, where we get further assessment of the individual, we get preparation for training and development, we get physical and medical screening and psychological assessment. So in this part, we're looking for the talent. In this part here, we're making sure. And then in phase 4 here, we're now trialing them into sports-specific elite training environments, and we'll come back to that in a second when we look at sports institutes in a second. So we are saying here that there are 4 phases to the development pathways. Effectively, we've got identify, we've got check and be sure, and then we've got train. Okay, now they all overlap, but it's worth thinking about in that way. We're also interested in what the role of different structures are, so schools, clubs and universities. Now we've stated here that one moves into the other. These are, let's be clear, these overlap. This is a whole continuum, and people can move in any direction along this continuum, okay? So of course, what are schools in relation to opportunity? Well, they're often first access for everyone, think PE, extracurricular, sometimes schools specialised. I was at a volleyball school recently. You get coaching there, you get specialist facilities, often the best facilities in the town. You get competitions against the schools, they link with the clubs, more of which, and sometimes you get like district honours and these sorts of things, right? Schools also link with clubs. Now, clubs are community-based. They give competition. They sometimes scout and do talent ID. They provide high-quality coaching. Sometimes they provide equipment, facilities, mixed quality. Financial concessions for those in need. So, if someone can't afford to pay a registration to, let's say, a football club, they might get support for that. And some clubs give therapeutic support, as an example. But when we move into like the university structure, this of course is a higher level. Sometimes support through scholarships and bursaries to make it affordable. Really high quality facilities, really high quality coaching, really high quality competition, often on a Wednesday afternoon. Sports science and medical support. It allows students to train and compete while studying. How wonderful. And host centres of excellence, such as at the sports institutes in places like Loughborough. My daughter, who's doing OCR A-Level right now, she's hoping to go to university and be a table tennis player in the future. So exactly this kind of model, right? Which plays table tennis. Now then, let's go here. What is the role of UK sport? So what does it do? Can I just stress these days, UK sport is an arm of Sport England. I'm going to assume you know that. So what does it do? It develops the world-class programme, more of which in a second, and they assist the national governing bodies to provide the world-class programme, which basically all the Olympic athletes are on. They provide national governing body funding. So if sports are successful, more funding is allocated. If sports are unsuccessful, it's taken away or it's reduced. Finances the national institutes, more of which in a second. They do elite coach development and financial support. Also, they fund support athletes, and NGB nominated athletes can apply for funding support through UK Sport. And they're interested in talent ID, so they've got the finances to implement it. And they've also got uncovering and tapped talent. And there's all kinds of aspects. There's even some anthropometrical aspects of this where they literally measure in small numbers some people to see if they might have a potential quality. Now, one of the things there we talked about was UK Sports World Class Programme. That's what we mean by this WCP World Class Programme. What is it? Well, we need to know that it's more complex, this, by the way, but there's 2 levels of it. Level 1 is podium potential. Level 2 is level 2 is podium potential. Level 1 is podium. So up here, we've got our gold. We've got our kind of gold medal potential winners up here, and you can see up here we're talking about support athletes with the potential to win medals at the very next Olympics. So this funding here is to go and get as many gold medals and silver and bronze medals as possible. Podium potential slightly different, and it supports athletes with the potential to win a medal at the next but one Olympics. So this is for the future talent, often of course for young people. And can I stress here that the whole idea of this is that these athletes can be full-time professional athletes rather than having to fund themselves. That's what the World Class Programme is. Now I'm going to finish off here, folks. Two more things. National Institutes, what are they? These are specialist locations. Look, world-class performance environments, swimming in Bath University, or canoeing in Nottingham. You've got Sailing Institute in Weymouth, numerous others. So here, what are they? We've got talent ID schemes such as Discover Your Goal. Like, these organisations will literally go out and hunt potential people. They provide sports science such as nutritional, biomechanical and physiological advice. They provide medical support, including physiotherapy and doctors. The athletes will tend to live in these places, right, or near these places. They've got technological support such as prosthetics for Paralympic athletes, or performance bikes or blades. And finally, they do lots of research, okay, often working with doctorate level students, and they get the most up-to-date research and training, making sure that British athletes are the most equipped or the most modern in terms of their pursuits. And then guys, finally, and I made this really small, we've got a tendency in the UK where people will drop out of high-level training to get to that sort of professional standard. And these are the strategies. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to prevent elites drop out. So a young person, let's say, who wants to be an athlete, wants to be a full-time sports person, how can we put things in place to prevent them falling to the wayside? So here we can do. Give them advice, especially performance lifestyle. Give them media training so that scrutiny and pressure is better managed. Give them medical support and, when necessary, intervention to prevent them experiencing injuries. Physiotherapy, excellent example. We've looked at training at adaptations, actually making it more sustainable, giving them psychological support, not just physical training and development, and identify the problem, evaluate the athlete and identify potential stressors. In other words, what we want to do here is we want to preempt the issue of why someone might drop out and you know, hopefully prevent that. Now guys, I can't stress enough how massive amount of information we've just gone over. I can't guarantee that any or all of that will be in your paper, but it's hard to imagine that none of it will be, because we've covered so much. I realise it's a fast session, but what do you want me to do? Like, do less or give you loads and loads and loads, which is what I'm trying to do. And I hope it's valued and I hope it's valuable, and go smash it, guys, and we'll have a quick chat.
Whew. There we go, folks. Marta,
yeah.
Thoughts? I'm really sweaty. Someone's placed a very cold drink in front of me. I'm gonna open it. Wait, like that, and I'm gonna let anyone that's in the call try and guess what this drink is. And I will reveal all in just a moment.
Something delicious.
All I would say is I'm a classy guy. That's what I am going to say. Marta, any questions, any thoughts, any shout-outs? What we gonna go for here?
I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
You've been talking a little bit about Lottie Dodd. Could you tell me a bit more about why she's such an important influence in women's sport? Yeah.
Okay. So we need. By the way, some of the things I want to mention here. I'll try and contain it to the vast majority of which could be relevant to your exam. Some of it I really enjoy my sports history, so allow me just to flirt with a couple of other bits and bobs as well, because it's quite an interesting little story. So what we understand as lawn tennis today, you know, think Djokovic at Roland Garros yesterday, and who won, was it Swiatek? Did we win? So anyway, that sport developed as a back garden activity that was played on croquet lawns, behind high-walled, middle-class suburban family homes in suburban cities, parts of cities, okay? So that was the next game. And the game was deemed as being acceptable for both males and females in that setting. Why? Because when men and women play, or often young men and women played this lawn tennis game together, and by the way, it was based off a bag of equipment was invented by this guy called Major Compton Wingfield. A bag of equipment called Schwerist became lawn tennis. It was like a bag of rackets and balls and a rope to make a figure of 8 and a net. Anyway, this game was progressed on in this kind of contained environment of high-walled lawned croquet lawn back gardens. And what would happen is that men and women would play the game together. And it was almost like an accepted courting ritual. And if you're not sure what that means, courting would be, like, I suppose, like chaperone dating environment, right? So what would happen here is the whole ambiance of these matches would be, the ladies would wear their long flowing dresses, be summer, think Pims, they didn't have that then obviously, but like refreshing drinks and what have you, and well-to-do bonnets. And basically the women weren't expected to be good. And there was a whole sort of ambiance of, oh, I missed it. Oh, could you get the ball from me? I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Sport in the British, read it, unbelievable book. Anyway, so what would happen is this was the environment where men and women could meet each other in this tennis environment. But of course, what happens when you allow these things? People go, nah, I ain't doing it like that. We're doing it like we want to do it. Think Serena in the modern day. But in that day, it was Charlotte Dodd. The woman was an animal. And she went out, and I won't give you all of her credit, but she smashed, she basically smashed, and all this thing like, women are meant to be this, that, and the other, and she was like, nah, mate. And I'm sure she didn't say that. And she did she performed how she wanted to perform, and she did it with force, grace too, and was an absolute animal of a tennis player. You're right, you two? Got two.
Still live?
You were live right now. Yeah, see you in a minute. Okay, so anyway, that's why I thought that one. What I would say is the lag and the legacy of that sort of ladylike, damaging view of women does persist and still has it. As recently as 20 years ago, which I know seems a long time ago to you, there was a really famous case where a boxer called Jane Couch, and she wanted to fight for a world championship in Britain, and the BBC, the British Board of Control, not the TV people, they banned Jane Couch from boxing, the BBC, and this was the reason they gave. Listen to this. They said, you cannot box because there is a 25% chance that during the time that the bout takes place, you will be emotionally unstable because of your menstrual cycle. Think about that. 20 years ago. She was an absolutely magnificent boxer, and they prevented her because it was dangerous. And before, it was more to do with the damaging of the sort of delicate reproductive kind of internal organs of women, this sort of thing. Absolute absolute rubbish. But, this was the pseudoscience that was pervasive at the time.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And I've got another question that's coming from students asking, what were your thoughts on PE paper 2?
I sort of don't want to say it. Well, I will say it. I thought it was. I'm going to use language to talk around it. I thought it was accessible. Yeah.
Okay.
Read into that. Not as rigorous as I would like to see. That would be what I would say about paper 2. I would prefer not to say too much more than that, because I may already be in conversations with a couple of people about this. Listen, it's great when you come out of an exam and you feel like you've had a right go at it, right? That's a great thing. But also exams need to have the capacity to allow people to express what they've learned and do it in a challenging and rigorous environment. That's always a balancing act. But yeah, that would be my overriding take. But hopefully everyone felt they had a right good go at it. That's what I think probably was the case. If you didn't, I'm sorry if I've said it that way, but that is my honest opinion. So there you go.
Cool. And then we've got a couple of shout outs. One to King's College.
I've just seen on Twitter actually, lovely photo.
Lovely photo of the students doing revision.
Yeah, good. It looks hot. I don't know if it's as hot there as it is here, because it's roasting here. So fair play to you for in that room. I don't know if it's stuffy like it is, but yeah, thank you guys in Taunton. I think it's Sarah. I think Rory's there as well. I want to say Sarah, Rory. There's quite a few staff I've communicated with at Taunton's.
And also another shout out to South Hunsley PE. They sent also a picture there, also joining us the revision, saying thank you for tonight's session.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. Thank you for taking part. I appreciate it. Now, I'm going to go for a big reveal at this point. So South Hunsley, sorry, let me do a proper shout. I'm going to give a big reveal. So a big reveal of that drink, that refreshing substance. Here it is. I'm going to bring it up into shot. What you think it's going to be? Do you think it's going to be sort of a posh, like some kind of bock or something? Or that, folks, is what can only be described as a freeway diet lemonade. Yes, other supermarkets available. This one happens to be
But
Lidl.
It's not available. From
No,
the supermarket,
this one's Lidl's own brand, cheap diet lemonade. Oh, it's cold though. So after what I think is the 13 sessions this summer we've done.
Celebrate the end.
That is
of
the celebration.
Sessions.
And I just want to, can I just pay a little bit of credit before we sign off? You guys have still got exams to do, so you don't want to hear all this soppy stuff. Probably want to ignore me. But can I just sign off with a little bit of credit to the teachers out there for organising people into rooms and students and getting this material in there with infographics, exams. Honestly, from my heart, I really appreciate that. I know you're super appreciative as well, and I'm so grateful for that. But we do genuinely appreciate that you put these resources in front of the students. And what have you? Oh, Martin's just done some kind of question mark. Yeah, go fire away.
Another question's come in. Students asking, you believe it would be worth mentioning figures like Thomas Arnold in relation to post-1850 industrial Britain, or just to focus more on the concepts of muscular Christianity and the cult of athleticism? Okay,
so the answer is yes. You don't have to use Thomas Arnold. You could use Thring at Uppingham, for example, is another really good, or Dorothea Beale, another really good example. The only thing I would say about that is, technically speaking, Thomas Arnold was pre-1850, so bear in mind he actually died still as head teacher, and it was pre-18. I think I'm going to say it was 1844, 1848. I might be check that date, but so that would be the only technical. And if you don't know who Thomas Arnold is, don't worry. A very, very quick intro. He became head teacher of rugby school, I believe it was in the 1820s. Again, check the dates on Wikipedia or whatever. And effectively what he did is, rather than banning a lot of what were the rowdy sports that were going on at that time at rugby school, rugby sort of Midlands way, just off the M1, and not at that time. And basically, he did what was called allowing on-site activities. So all these sort of rowdy, trespassing-based off-site activities that the boys were doing, they now became kind of self-contained. He banned firearms, he banned alcohol, but trust me, this stuff was going on a lot in these schools. And what happened as a result of this is all this kind of male energy and enthusiasm and physicality got sort of contained in the school grounds. He built out the house system, and all of a sudden you've got literally sports like rugby developing in that location, being based in the spaces that are in between the buildings. Posts go up. It's the whole school versus schoolhouse competitions. And what he eventually did was, he initially put sixth formers in charge of the game, so it was a version of social control and management themselves to get better behaviour. He really developed, he was a very sort of pious Christian guy, developed Christianity through the boys as well, a lot of chapel-based learning. And then finally he started, and other schools were doing this by that time as well, by the 1870s, this would have been after him, they were appointing specialist coaches, specialist sports masters, teachers who taught, let's say, Latin, but also cricket or whatever it happened to be. And you've got this whole sort of then network of sports. And by this point, of course, different schools were playing each other. One little detail that I love about inter-school, public school sport in the 19th century is, let's say rugby played Winchester or Charterhouse or whatever. They'd all have their different versions of football, and they'd play the first half in one school's version and the second half in the other school's version, which I think should be brought back. It'd be absolute genius. So yeah, a big fan of Thomas Arnold. Thomas Hardy wrote the book Tom Brown's School Days. Is a wonderful read. I know you're going to ignore me, but it's a book I've read multiple times in my life, and I just want to recommend once again for anyone who's really interested in this topic, can I recommend a book? I'm going to say it's Holt is the author, but I'd have to check. There you go. Did I get Holt right? Richard Holt, Sport and the British. That was a bit of luck, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I just grabbed it off the shelf. Thought that book there, I cannot recommend it highly enough if you are genuinely interested in the heritage of British sport. That is class, and I cannot emphasise enough. If you're in never mind exams this summer, go read that book. If I tell you what, if someone does a really nice show, I'll send them that book for free, because it's my version. I think I've read it about 10 times. So if anybody wants that, do something nice online. I can't think of anything good, and I'll send it to you. Okay, lovely.
Okay.
Marta, any other questions?
No more questions.
Cool. Guys, thank you. Teachers, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to go and enjoy this. A-level students, it's tough what you're doing. My daughter's doing it. She's doing this paper next week as well. It's hard. She's at chemistry, it's a very tough paper. Right? So I get it. I understand how you feel. I don't know what adults should say to young people. They're just like, I think my hope is that hard work and commitment is rewarded with the output. I think whatever your input is should be rewarded. And that's what I hope, and hopefully we've added a little bit of value to that. That's my intent anyway. Brilliant. Marta, all good? Happy?
Yeah, super happy.
Cheers, folks. Have a cracking afternoon. We
All the
appreciate
very
you.
best.
Teachers, we really appreciate you too. Have a great one, folks.